Take a look at this. It's pretty fascinating, isn't it? It looks like that condemned prisoner we talked about in Russia, the Admiral Kuznetsov. Well, if you think this looks similar, you'd be correct, as it's technically the sister ship of the Kuznetsov, the Varyag. Unlike the Kuznetsov, she wasn't stolen by the Russians. No, instead, the incomplete ship sat around in Ukraine, waiting to either be scrapped or have someone purchase her. Quietly, like the Grinch on Mount Crumpet, the Ukrainians heard singing from the east, a red sun rising in the sky. Yes, the Chinese purchased the incomplete ship in 1998, and for well over a decade, the ship had an extensive refit, and through their efforts, it seems like the now Liaoning isn't a flaming bag of poo like the Kuznetsov. In today's video, we're going to cover the Kuznetsov's Chinese sister, the Liaoning. The Kuznetsov class was not the first class of aircraft carriers, or in Soviet parlance, aircraft carrying cruisers, because the term aircraft carrier was far too Western and imperialist. Granted, there was something to do with the Montreux Convention, but let's not get bogged down in the minutiae of all that. Instead, let's look at a wonderful time in the world, the 1970s, a time of declining Cold War tension, disco, and worldwide economic problems. But for our purposes, what is important in the 1970s are the Kiev-class carriers. These odd hybrid warships that combine the roles of a cruiser and an aircraft carrier, they didn't do either really well, being a bit ambitious yet rubbish. After constructing 3, the Soviets wanted a more capable and dedicated aircraft carrier. Although, keep those carriers in the back of your mind, as we'll talk about them in the future. The desire can be seen in the 4th ship of the Kiev-class, Baku, which had an interesting history of its own. Now an Indian carrier, it's closer to the Admiral Kuznetsov class. In order to not interfere with the speed of carrier construction, which was not to be delayed as the USSR had only one yard being able to build such ships, it was built to a modified version and not radically to a new design, essentially being the testbed for a lot of technologies and problems the Kuznetsov class faced. Nevertheless, the Kuznetsov class's design stems directly from the Kiev class, enlarged and with the major difference being that the earlier anti-ship missile container/launchers that demanded the whole foredeck of the Kievs had been replaced by vertical launch silos. The Kuznetsov class carriers in the Soviet Union marked a new era in Soviet naval development, as this class of ships marked the first real aircraft carrying ships designed for the Soviet Navy. Nevertheless, their design came as a compromise between Soviet naval doctrine and conventional carrier design. The Kuznetsov class differed from other carriers because instead of being designed solely for aviation purposes, like in the West, they also carried an extensive number of anti-ship missiles and were designated heavy aircraft carrying cruisers. A very important distinction. One of the most prominent features of this type of ship is the prominent large ski jump runway because of the unavailability of catapult systems. I'll be quite frank, I'm not an expert when it comes to a lot of this technology since I've spent most of my time reading about the age of steam and steel, so this is all quite new to me here. Here are the particulars as found in Soviet/Russian aircraft carriers, The Aircraft Carriers of the World, Volume 4 by Simon Bierbaum, not beer bong, beer bomb. Do note that our beautiful Chinese ship has gone through a number of refits and reconstructions in her history, so those particulars do change and we'll touch on them in the future, or at least the refits and reconstructions. Whoa, folks. I need to be a YouTuber for once and ask you all to subscribe. Only a handful of you who watch these videos are actually subscribed, and it would help me out a lot if you did. I know a lot of you think this call to action is corny and stupid, but it's proven that it actually helps, so please actually do subscribe, maybe even like the video. It all really helps. If you all don't subscribe, the channel is going to die. The ship started life off as Riga and then renamed Varyag after the independence of the Baltic states. Not exactly as fun as the Kuznetsov when it comes to name changes, but still it's not bad. The ship wasn't quite as far along as the Kuznetsov when the Soviet Union collapsed, being only about 70% complete when the rotten structure completely went, leaving Ukraine with quite the carrier force. That didn't last long as the Russians soon hijacked the Admiral Kuznetsov, leaving the Ukrainians with one of the sisters' incomplete hulks just sitting around in the Black Sea because the cost to complete the thing was going to be immense. And obviously, they had a bit of nation building to do, so something like that wasn't exactly something they were interested in. But what every new nation needs is cash, so they began looking for suitors. Maybe nations like India, Russia, or possibly the People's Republic of China. Okay, we're not going to do that bit anymore because you all got tired of the aircraft carrying cruiser one. So, you see, the Chinese had ambitions, and to achieve those ambitions, they needed a navy. Something that was pretty far fetched in the late 1980s and early 1990s due to other issues. Okay, in 1985, they did purchase HMAS Melbourne, but I mean, she didn't really do a whole lot besides get tested on. So I kind of left her out of the script. My bad, everyone. Still, in the first half of the 1990s, the Chinese were in talks with the Ukrainians to purchase the aircraft carrier, as well as with the Russians to purchase some of the Kiev class. But nothing came of these talks, and the Chinese were exploring their options in the 1990s with European countries offering aircraft carrier technology and ideas to the PRC. But the Chinese were still interested in some of that sweet ex-Soviet tech. As in 1995, Minsk was purchased from South Korea, where she was originally sold to be scrapped, and instead the Chinese turned her into a museum. Certainly nothing catastrophic has ever happened to that ship. Oh, wait. That same thing happened to Kiev in 2000, and she's also part of a Chinese theme park. The same thing with Minsk. A very interesting and weird fate for those ships, but hey, we've got so many museum ships here in the States, who am I to judge? With all these ex-Soviet aircraft carriers being purchased by the Chinese to be turned into theme parks, you'd think that the Varyag would be bought up to have the same thing done to her. And you'd be right. Good job, gold star for you, buddy. In March of 1998, the Varyag was bought by the Chonglot Tourist and Amusement Park Agency for $20 million. Not a bad deal, right? Well, that's about 3 times their scrap value. Chonglot was based in the Portuguese colony of Macau. Although the company had no offices there, Chonglot was in fact a subsidiary of the Hong Kong company Chin Lick Holdings, where in 1998 there were plans to turn the Varyag into a giant floating casino. If you all didn't know this, Macau is known in part for its night scene and casinos, some calling it the Las Vegas of the East. What a great idea, you might say. The other carriers were proving to be successful. Why not have this massive carrier turned into a casino? What could go wrong? Well, 2 things become evident extremely quickly. The first being that the authorities in Macau did not have any idea of the proposal, application, or anything really to tell them that there was this plan in place to bring a massive aircraft carrier to the city. And then the really big one. There's no room in the water surrounding Macau to fit such a ship. The waters are too shallow, and the whole plan smelled really fishy, like shark fin soup. When news of the sale was announced, the Russian media claimed that those Chinese companies were acting on behalf of the Chinese government. The Chinese embassy in Moscow was quick to dismiss these reports, because why would the Chinese government have an interest in aircraft carriers when they had plans in Taiwan or in the South China Sea? However, investigations by the Hong Kong media revealed that the 2 companies involved in the purchase of the Varyag had close connections with the PRC. 2 of Chonglot's directors were former PLAN officers. In August 1999, Hong Kong-based Goldspot Investments became a majority shareholder in Chonglot. One of the directors of Goldspot had an address inside the military compound in Beijing. Again, none of this is suspicious. Come on, guys. The majority shareholder of Goldspot is China Securities International, Ltd., which in turn is a subsidiary of China Securities, a large state-owned brokerage house. The plan to tow the Varyag to Macau was held up for 15 months because the Turkish authorities refused to allow the vessel to pass through the Bosphorus Strait, alleging a danger to shipping. Okay, something similar happened with the Admiral Kuznetsov, but instead she could steam under her own power, and she literally plug-walked through the straits, entering them at 30 knots. In September 2001, Turkey finally gave permission for the passage. After an eventful journey through the Mediterranean and around the Cape of Good Hope, the Varyag arrived in March 2002 at the northeastern Chinese port of Dalian. The owners continued to assert that the vessel was going to be turned into a casino. Also, ignore the fact that the deputy foreign minister, who visited Ankara in September 2001, a visit that finally won passage for the Varyag, reportedly, allegedly, offered the Turkish government $360 million in economic aid and a tourism package to push the issue forward. But still, why would the Chinese government or companies want these aircraft carriers? I mean, the Kiev class was proving to be a somewhat successful attraction. Surely Chinese naval architects and engineers couldn't learn a great deal about the construction of aircraft carriers by inspecting these vessels. Presumably, PLAN experts had already inspected the three carriers. In May 2002, Hong Kong media reported that security around the Kiev and Tianjin was very tight, leading to speculation that naval architects and engineers were examining the vessel. I mean, there's no way the Chinese could take an incomplete ship like the Varyag and transform her into something competent, right? Right? Before we continue, we need to discuss what the heck China is doing here, because it's critical to the refit and reconstruction of the casino. The People's Liberation Army Navy, for the first 30 years or so of the PRC, wasn't exactly a priority. But starting in the 1980s, things started to shift, as Admiral Liu Huaqing, widely regarded as the father of the modern Chinese Navy. If you didn't know, this guy's extremely important to the Chinese Navy. I even saw a recent book calling him China's Mahan. Anyway, serving as commander of the PLAN in the 1980s and later as vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, Admiral Liu fundamentally shifted China's military philosophy away from traditional land-centric thinking to recognize the absolute geopolitical necessity of a carrier fleet. He established a definitive multi-stage timeline for Chinese naval power projection, dictating that the PLAN should master green water capabilities out in the first island chain by the year 2000, and expand blue water operations, reaching the second island chain by 2020. Crucially, Liu maintained that an aircraft carrier was an indispensable asset to assert regional dominance and project maritime sovereignty, famously by asserting that China could not truly defend its oceanic interests without one. His persistent bureaucratic advocacy laid the structural and doctrinal groundwork that eventually led to the purchase of our favorite Chinese casino. Okay, with that boring stuff out of the way, where was our beautiful casino headed? Well, she headed to Dailan to get ready to be transformed not into a casino, but a capable warship, eventually becoming the Type 001 Liaoning. But when China acquired the incomplete Soviet carrier in 2002, the hull was a stripped, rusted shell lacking propulsion, electronics, and weaponry. Over the next decade or so, at the Dailan shipyard, Chinese engineers completely transformed the vessel. The most significant structural alteration involved gutting the massive Soviet-designed P-700 Granite anti-ship missile silos located beneath the flight deck. Because why would you want your aircraft carrier being some stupid half-baked aircraft-carrying cruiser? I mean, what idiots came up with that? Removing these structural silos freed up critical internal volume, allowing engineers to substantially expand the ship's hangar space, ammunition storage, and aviation fuel capacity. Additionally, China replaced the intended Soviet propulsion systems with domestic high-pressure boilers and installed entirely modern localized infrastructure. This included radars, integrated command and control systems, and domestic close-in air defense networks, such as the Type 1130 CIWS. This extensive refit/reconstruction successfully repurposed a Soviet aircraft-carrying cruiser hull into China's first operational aviation-focused aircraft carrier. Obviously, when it comes to things like this coming out of China and honestly anywhere these days, take the info with a grain of salt because it seems like it's about right. In 2011, the Chinese made the first public acknowledgements that yes, they turned that ship they bought to turn into a casino into a functional warship. Geez Louise, what else did you think was going to happen, silly billies? Because, well, the ship began sea trials that summer, and you really have to acknowledge that. Eventually being handed over to the Navy in 2012, where she's been operating with the Chinese Navy since, with some repairs and refits along the way. When it comes to the success of the reconstruction, I'll leave that to you to decide, but there's no denying the fact that this is a large stepping stone for the People's Liberation Army Navy, and how they want to go about building their Navy. I mean, they like the design so much, Or better yet, they probably didn't have the capabilities to build anything more, but the following carrier, the Shandong, is basically a modified version of this one. However, compared to the Admiral Kuznetsov, I can say without a doubt, the Liaoning is a far superior ship. I mean, at least in terms of movement. The two ships have structural similarities, but beyond that, they are very different in their makeup and internal systems. Since the Chinese appear to have been taking care of the vessel and not using Mazut as fuel, the ship is in far better condition. Not only that, being a pure aircraft carrier, she is far superior in her capabilities. Not having those anti-ship missiles really helps. There are rumors that the Russians might hand over Old Smoky to the Chinese to refit her, but that's just a rumor, and an expensive one at that. She'll most likely get scrapped because the Russians have a new pride of the fleet. However, the Admiral Kuznetsov's Chinese half-sister will most likely not get scrapped anytime soon, as she's a critical component of the PLAN, even with the new Fujin class coming out. What do you think of these ships? Let me know down below. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please remember to like and subscribe, as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great week.